Welcome to the Fast Leader Podcast, where we uncover the leadership life hacks that help you to experience breakout performance faster and rocket to success. And now, here's your host, customer and employee engagement expert and certified emotional intelligence practitioner, Jim Rimbach.
Call Center Coach develops and unites the next generation of call center leaders. Through our e-learning and community, individuals gain knowledge and skills in the 6 core competencies that is the blueprint that develops high-performing call center leaders. Successful supervisors do not just happen. So go to callcentercoach.com to learn more about enrollment and download your copy of the Supervisor Success Path ebook now. Okay, Fast Leader Legion, today I'm excited because we're going to have somebody on the show today who's going to help us with something that I would dare to say you've been wanting to do, but have been quite hesitant because you're not sure of why and whether or not it'd be accepted. Andrew Tarvin was born in and raised in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio. He's the youngest of 3 boys and the nerdiest of the bunch. Always the academic, Drew cried when he got an A- in the 4th grade and was voted the teacher's pet for his senior superlative. After his parents divorced at the age of 15, Drew and his mom moved out while he finished high school. He graduated 4th in his class of 400 plus students and then went on to The Ohio State University to earn a degree in computer science and engineering. It was there that he also discovered a passion for improv and stand-up comedy. After graduating, Drew started working as an IT manager at Proctor Gamble, first in Cincinnati and then in New York City. All the while, he continued studying, practicing, and performing comedy. While at P&G, he realized that a big reason for his success was not just what he earned or learned in computer science class, but also what he learned on the comedy stage. He started incorporating humor into his work, eventually proclaiming himself as the corporate humorist of P&G. His passion for teaching others how to get better results while having more fun continued to grow. So he built a company called Humor That Works to share the message with the broader world. He left P&G to focus on the company full-time in 2012 and has since delivered more than 500 events in front of 40,000 plus people from more than 250 organizations all around the world. Drew currently lives in New York City, where he runs Humor That Works and continues to perform comedy and enjoys walking the streets with a milkshake in hand. Drew Tarvin, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I am so ready. That was a fantastic intro. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it should be great. You wrote it.
Yeah, I know. But it's also like, you so often give the standard, runs this company, does these things, that's it. But I love the request when it came through of let's learn a little bit more about you as a human. So I appreciate it. It's always nice.
Well, and you're welcome. And one of the things that I definitely try to differentiate what we do here at the Fast Leader Show is knowing and learning, about the people behind the insights that they're going to share, because one of the things I always say is that it's not what you do that makes you great. It's who you are that makes what you do great. And that's one reason why I think it was so important to have your message and have you on the show, because I think a lot of us want to be funny. A lot of us want to make people find, joy in the things that we do and say, but oftentimes we just kind of stumble and we don't do a good job of it. But there's also a very important financial impact associated with this that I think it's important that we start out with.
Yeah, for sure. And that is, as an engineer, to me, that's why it's so valuable and why I was interested in it. Was not just because it was fun, but because it worked, because it was effective. And so, when I started to research this and started to realize that I wasn't the only one getting these benefits, I wanted to capture what are all of the benefits. And so as an individual, there's 30 plus benefits to using humor in the workplace, ranging from getting people to pay attention to your message, to increasing your kind of leadership and influence skills, up to burning calories. 10 to 15 minutes of laughter burns as many calories as 5 minutes of aerobic exercise, 10 minutes of dancing, or 15 minutes of milking a cow. So I don't know how some of your listeners are exercising, but if they're milking cows, then they can just stop and laugh instead. But that you can then also see that how if there's all these benefits for individuals, when an organization starts to do it, when they embrace a culture of humor, you see an increase in employee engagement, a decrease in employee turnover. You see an increase in employee productivity and ultimately an increase in profit because you're managing the human side of things. And I think that's where we've kind of lost our way a little bit with work, is that in the Industrial Revolution, we focus so much on efficiency. How do we produce as much as possible with the least amount of work? And the problem is you can't be efficient with humans. Instead, you have to be effective. And so humor turns out to be one of the most effective tools we have for human beings.
Well, also, I think for me, sometimes it helps bust the over focus, and it's a whole different, actually release some of the stress that we often find when we're trying to be more efficient.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at its simplest level, like as an engineer, I'm obsessed with productivity. I've done a ton of research on it. And I have found that it is very difficult to be productive if you are dead, right? Or if you feel like death, if you're sick, if you're tired, if you're burned out, stressed out, worn out, very difficult to be productive. And so humor can be a very strategic way to recharge, to relieve that stress, because we know stress by itself isn't a bad thing. Stress is how we increase our capacity. It can be good, but chronic stress leads to an increase in blood pressure, a decrease in the immune system, an increase in muscle tension, all these negative physiological effects of stress. Well, humor and laughter can counteract those effects. So it's very much about how do we strategically use it for better results.
Well, and some of the irony of that is that stress actually could cause, or the lack of humor could actually cause more stress. And what I mean by that is you have a pie chart, some statistics in here that talks about, what is preventing you from using, humor at work. And there was really a staggering, majority of people that just you feel that others won't approve of it.
Yeah, and that I think was one of the big kind of moments or aha moments for me as I was starting in this work, because when I started to read all this research about the benefits of humor, the question becomes, okay, why don't people use it more? And so we ran a study through our site, and the number one reason why people don't use humor in the workplace is they say that they don't think that their boss or coworkers would approve. And that's just a cultural thing, right? And what that means is that if you're a leader on a team and you don't see your team laughing, or you don't see people kind of joking with each other, you might be part of the reason why. And it's usually not an overt kind of like, I'm a very stern person and never, laughs, although that sometimes happens in some organizations. But more often it's people just don't see it. They don't know that it's welcome. But the reality is that 98% of CEOs prefer job candidates with a sense of humor, and 81% of employees say a fun workplace would make them more productive. And so I think it's something that people are seeking. It's something that they want. It just hasn't been part of, the norm. It hasn't been part of the culture before. And that's part of, what we're trying to do is how do we change that? How do we recognize and elevate the status of humor? That's why we call it the missing skill, is we know the skills that we go through for work all the time, right? 5 core skills of work of executing, thinking, communicating, connecting, and leading. And so that missing skill isn't just what you do, but how you do it and how you actually enjoy your work more.
I think that's a really important point in a lot of ways. But then it also goes into something that, talking about one of the other statistics associated with that, is that people just feel that they just don't know how. Mm-hmm. And that's where you talked about is, the help that you're doing. But, talking about the how component, I think it probably starts with, let's talk about the definition of humor that you have.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, to your point, the how, people are a little bit worried and nervous about it. And this, even connecting back to the, the last statistic, is that, in my programs, I will joke, that like the people, and I'm sure this is true too of your listeners, is that I'm sure that many of your listeners are likable people at home. Right. And then they go into the workplace and something changes, right? They feel like they have to put on a work face. Like at home, they're silly. They already make jokes with their friends. They already make them laugh. They, maybe sing in the shower. They dance in the kitchen, whatever it is, they're more human. And then they go into the workplace and they put on a work face. And so kind of touching on that idea of humor in the workplace, we're not talking about being funny, right? When we think of humor, a lot of times we think of punchlines, we think of stand-up comedians, we think of jokes. And so people are nervous to say, oh, humor in the work, does that mean I have to like learn jokes and, start riffing them off in the workplace? And the answer is no. When we're talking about humor in the workplace, we're not talking about making it funny so much as making it a little bit more fun, about bringing a little bit more of your personality and kind of doing it in a good way, right? Keeping it positive and inclusive, but finding just more ways to add a little bit more joy or levity or fun to the workplace.
Well, and with that, you talk about the different styles. Mm-hmm. of humor. So if you could share with us what you see as those.
Yeah, and I think it's a very helpful thing. When I first read it, it was like, oh, this helps me, makes a lot more sense. So psychologist Rod A. Martin defined 4 styles of humor. The first style is affiliative humor. This is positive, inclusive humor. I think of kind of like Ellen DeGeneres, right? It's always fun. It's playful. Everyone is included. This would be in the workplace, something like a team building activity, or even just going to happy hour, right? Simple, positive, inclusive humor. The second style is self-enhancing humor, and this is a positive form of humor where the target is yourself. So this, I think, is best expressed by the Kurt Vonnegut quote that says, laughter and tears are both responses to frustration. I myself prefer to laugh because there's less cleaning up to do afterwards. Right? It's that perception where whatever's going on in life, you find ways to add a little bit more fun or find the humor in it, right? Rather than crying about something or being overly stressed about it, like, okay, how do I find the fun or the humor in this concept? And so that's things like gamifying your work, playing your work to make it a little bit more fun, finding ways to make the tasks that you have to do a little bit more enjoyable. The third style of humor is self-defeating humor. So this is a negative form of humor where the target is yourself. So this is kind of poking fun at yourself. It's old school kind of Rodney Dangerfield. And self-defeating humor can be great in a couple of situations. One, it can be really good when you're in a high status position, because what it does is it helps to reduce status differentials. If you can say, if you can poke fun at yourself, then you're saying to other people that you don't take yourself too seriously. It's also best used when sporadic. You don't want to use it all the time, because if you use it too much, then people start to think like, wait, is this person throwing a pity party? Or do they have low self-esteem? I feel like that, laughing at them over and over again. And so you want to use it in moderation, and in certain situations it can be good. And then the fourth style of humor is aggressive humor. And this is a negative form of humor where someone else or something else is the target. So this is sarcasm, this is satire. This is a pretty popular form that we see in pop culture. And it's great for, making people laugh. It can be very good for catharsis, but it's not good for creating positive change. And so when it comes to using humor like aggressive humor in the workplace, it's very, very, difficult or challenging to do well. So we tend to recommend to stay away from it. Now, one caveat that I'll give is that, for me, at least, and I don't know if you have friends like this, but growing up in school, there was a group of friends that we would always banter back and forth and kind of rib each other a little bit and kind of poke fun at each other. And when you have a solid relationship, there's a fine line between, say, aggressive humor and affiliative humor. And it's sometimes based on your relationship with that person. So yeah, if you have a group of people that you work with that you've known for 10 years and it's just part of the culture to kind of poke fun at each other, but it's all in playfulness and good spirits, yeah, that's not necessarily aggressive humor. It's more of when it's, sarcasm, satire with someone that you haven't, met or know very well. So typically, again, what we recommend is self-defeating every now and then, but really stick on affiliative and self-enhancing humor, and you'll do really well.
I think what you just identified there is probably one of the major problems as far as the whole inappropriateness and not sure how to do it because of, the most common, especially when you start talking about in the past 10 years, the explosion of devices and social media and this, that, and the other, is that people, lean so heavily on sarcasm and picking on other people. And now we have a whole, slew of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent on bullying and incivility at work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. And so it's recognizing, again, this is where it's a helpful reminder that your job is not to become a funny stand-up comedian in the workplace, right? It is to use a tool, humor, to get better results. And so, yeah, are people going to think that you're the funniest person in the world and that you should get a Netflix comedy special? Probably not. I mean, there's ways to do it. Ellen is one of my favorite comedians, and she's always positive and inclusive, with a lot of the jokes that she does. So it is possible, but again, that's not the goal. The goal is to get better results.
So with that, we start talking about skill levels and being able to apply. So it's okay, we learn about it. We kind of do some things that will help us to be able to apply it. And so there's different skill levels that you have in the book. And so you talk about 3. What are those 3 skill levels?
Well, so there's 3 kind of primary skills to being able to use humor. And so I am a big believer that humor is a skill, which means it can be learned, right? And I believe that because I am someone who has had to learn how to use humor. As you mentioned kind of in my bio, I'm an engineer. But as a comedian, I've done over 1,000 shows, right? As a stand-up comedian and improviser, I've spoken or performed in all 50 states and 25 countries and one planet, Earth. But when I went to my high school reunion and people found out that I did comedy, they were like, "But you're not funny." And that's because in school, I wasn't the life of the party or the class clown type person, right? As you mentioned, I was voted teacher's pet. But I started learning in college, and I started taking classes and reading about it and watching videos and doing as much as I could to learn a little bit more. And so the skill of humor kind of breaks down to three things. The first starts with your sense of humor. And this is simply like, what do you find interesting? What do you find funny? And everyone has a sense of humor, right? Everyone can start with that. And, a comedian, their perspective becomes very important. It's like, what makes you go, huh? That's kind of interesting. So that's the starting point, is just being observant and noticing more and noticing what you kind of find enjoyable or makes you laugh or makes you smile. The second component of humor is the ability to humor. So this is, how do you actually structure a joke? This is content and delivery. Can you deliver something in a way that people will kind of laugh at? And there's, helpful tips for that, of things like put the funny at the end and make sure you have kind of a structure of setup and punchline if you're doing a joke, or, delivering kind of content in a certain way. And that's all stuff that can kind of be learned and improved over time. The content piece is really building off of what you find funny or interesting. And then the final piece is agency of humor, or agency with humor. And this is your ability to use humor for a specific result, for a specific goal, right? Can you use humor to get people to pay attention? Can you use a story to build rapport with someone? And the interesting thing about using humor in the workplace is you don't actually have to be the creator of humor to use it. You can use your sense of humor to find something that you find interesting, and then you can think about its application and share that out. So, if there's a funny video that kind of makes a point for you, you can share the funny video and kind of say, "Hey, I thought about this because it relates to kind of what we were talking about in the team meeting earlier." Or, one of the things that I used to do is I used to include, and I still do for a lot of my emails, is a PS at the bottom that's just a joke. And I love coming up with puns, so a lot of times I created them myself, but you very easily could find a resource of jokes related to customer service or client management or leadership on the internet, and then just include those as various PSs in, emails or newsletters or, things that you're sending out. So again, you don't always have to be the creator of it, but you can be the shepherd of it. You can be the proponent, the one sharing those ideas in the workplace.
I mean, that's a really good point. And with that, you also have something to help people with the application component. You have something called a humor map. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the humor map.
Yeah, so humor map was a way for me to make sure that I was effectively using humor to achieve, a specific result. And so the map stands for your medium, your audience, and your purpose. So your medium is, how are you going to execute that humor, right? Is it in an email? Is it in a phone call? Is it in a one-on-one meeting? Because we know that a medium impacts our message, right? If thinking of something like sarcasm, you can kind of get away with some sarcasm in person, right? Because you kind of smile about it, or you kind of make sure the person knows kind of that you're joking. Much harder to do in an email where the person reads it and they're like, why is this person so angry? Or why is this person yelling at me or upset, or, that kind of thing. So your medium impacts your message. So you want to understand how you're going to execute the humor. The second piece is your audience, right? Who is going to receive that humor? One, what is your relationship to them? As we talked about before, a joke that you would make with a friend that you've known for 15 years is very different than a joke you would make with, someone calling into a customer service line or to an area for the very first time. And you also want to know, what does that audience you're speaking to need, and what do they expect? Because you want to deliver on what they need in a way that they don't expect. Like using humor, it's not replacing the work. Right? It's not being like, oh, I'm just going to be funny, and that way I don't actually have to do any work, and I don't have to create a presentation or, answer this question. No, it's about how you do it. And so you still need to deliver against kind of what's needed. It's just changing it so that you're doing it in a way that's maybe slightly unexpected, that's a little bit more playful or a little bit more fun. And then the final piece is your purpose. And this is the most important one, right? This is, why do you want to use humor? Because humor for the sake of, hey, let's just have some fun is okay. but it's such a powerful tool that you can use it for specific results. So you might say, oh, I want to use humor in an email to get people to actually pay attention to it and read it. Or maybe I want to use humor at the start of a meeting so that I can build some rapport with people and set the stage for what I'm going to talk about that day. Oh, maybe I want to use humor in this meeting so that I build relationships of the people in the room. Or maybe I want to use humor so that I can, like I said, reduce status differential so that people connect with me a little bit more and they're more likely to be influenced by what I say, right? Whatever your specific reason is, that's like becomes important for the purpose piece of it, because that's going to dictate what humor you might use, right? Incongruity humor, just a simple surprise, using a little bit of different language. For example, I call myself a humor engineer. Right? That's an example of incongruity because people haven't heard it before. Like, what does that mean? And that gives me a chance to talk about, I help organizations solve problems like most engineers do, but my, method is using humor. So simple incongruity gets people to pay attention a little bit more. Or association helps people remember things longer. There's a show here in New York City not too long ago, and they had a woman who is an astrophysicist explaining astrophysics using sci-fi movies. Or rather, she was ruining sci-fi movies because she was like talking about Star Wars and how like, hey, there are no explosions in space because there is no oxygen, or, lightsabers can't actually, aren't physically possible. Like the force isn't real, right? These were all explanations that, maybe would be a little bit dry to begin with, but because they're now connected to something that's more interesting, one, more likely to stay engaged, and two, easier to remember.
So as you're talking, I started thinking too, you're in the book, you talk about many different strategies. Mm-hmm. And so for me, if I'm talking about somebody who I'm not sure it's going to be accepted, but I'm willing to give it a go. I don't necessarily know how to do it. Unfortunately, I've probably leaned too heavily on the sarcasm component, or I'm too self-deprecating. So I need to learn, a different method. What strategy should they use in order to kind of get themselves going?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to start with. So as I mentioned, there's kind of 5 core skills of work, right? You have to be able to execute, complete a task. You have to be able to think, right? Critically, creatively, create a, project plan, all of that. You have to be able to communicate, right? Get people to understand what you're saying, articulate the intelligence that you have. You have to be able to connect, right? Emotional intelligence, empathy, and then you have to be able to lead. And so the second half of the book is all about different strategies for each one of those skills. So a great starting point is using humor for execution, right? Because that's something that no one else can control, right? No one can prevent you from doing some of these things. So for example, one of the things that I like to do is I like to read emails in a different accent in my head, right? If I'm bored when I'm batch processing email, I'll just start to read each of the emails in a different accent in my head as a way to stay engaged. No one can stop me from doing that. Right? No, my manager can't be like, come up to me and be like, hey, you're reading emails in an accent in your head. Stop it. Right? No one can do that. No one can prevent you from listening to a comedy podcast on your way home from work so that you relieve some stress and show up more present for your family. Right? So I think the execution kind of category is a very easy place to start, right? Because it's kind of self-contained, finding ways to, as we call, the first strategy is to play your work. Finding ways just to make the work that you have to do a little bit more fun, whether that is turning it into a game, like adding some gaming components to it, what they call gamification, or maybe just doing it with someone that you enjoy doing it with and kind of having a friendly competition or a conversation around it, connecting it with something you already like to do, right? There's these simple strategies that you can use to play your work. And again, what we talked about before of relieving stress. How can you strategically plan throughout the day, what we call strategic renewal or strategic disengagement? How can you plan to take a break? Like I'm an introvert, right? And I speak for a living. I do a bunch of trainings, but I have to recharge. And so I'm very deliberate that after I have even a great podcast like this, I have scheduled time after this to recharge on my own, to watch a couple of videos on YouTube or hop on Reddit for, a few minutes or whatever, just something to recharge my batteries so that the next podcast that I go into or the next email that I need to write, I'm more kind of engaged in.
Okay, so as you were thinking, I started looking at the industries that oftentimes I find myself working in, and that's in service contact centers and customer experience. And in that world, we talk a lot about, employee engagement, and, people who are disengaged. And And so, I mean, maybe you could flip that around and say, we're going to have a disengagement moment and load it with humor, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the strategic part. And I think, the terminology comes from Jim Schwartz, and wrote a great book on basically the idea of the corporate athlete. And so at the Human Performance Institute, they looked at world-class athletes and said, okay, what are they doing that maybe corporate people can learn from? And when you think about athletes, they're very deliberate about training very, very hard, but they're even more deliberate about resting and recharging and fueling the body. And so they came up with this idea of strategic disengagement, but then over time they've turned it into strategic renewal, probably because disengagement has this, negative connotation. But it's just this idea. It's all just fancy corporate words for take a break, right? The analogy that I think of, it's like if you're like, oh, I need to drive from New York to California as fast as possible. That means I'm not going to stop for gas, right? In a car that would make 0 sense. You'd run out of fuel and then be left stranded on the side of the highway, right? The same thing is true for our own productivity. Just like a phone, just like a car, we need to recharge, we need to refuel, and humor can be a way to do that. And that's, I think, what's new to people is they're like, yeah, I get it, right? That's what we have weekends for. That's why I take that one vacation once a year, but I've skipped the past couple of years because work's been busy or whatever. Like, that's strategic. No. We're talking about on a daily basis, almost hourly basis, right? Some people use the Pomodoro Technique, where they work for 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break. And they've done studies with that for hands-on tasks, people will be more productive working in increments of 25/5 than they are if they spend 4 hours straight on it, because we get into one of the things that we talk about in the book is decision fatigue. We just get tired. We aren't as creative. We need these. And this goes back to the managing human things. One of the things that I find interesting, and we did this, did this all the time as a project manager, is that we label people as resources, right? Just as computers are a resource or money is a resource, we say humans are a resource. And over time, we start to forget that the other person on the other side of an email or the other side of a phone call or the other side of a conference desk is a fellow human being, right? With human lives, human emotions, and maybe, just maybe, the reason why that email is late to you isn't because they secretly hate you, but because they have a sick kid at home. And humor is one of these things that helps to humanize us, right? What we say is to humor is to human. It's a very human trait. And so we don't want to shut that down. We don't want to close it off in terms of our work because it's no longer effective.
Most definitely. And when I start thinking about humor at work, when I start looking at the releasing of stress, when I start thinking about all these things, there's a lot of emotions that get tied up with it. And humor is one of those that I think we need to definitely bring more into the workplace. But is there a quote or two that you like that you can share with us?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I think, just kind of things to keep in mind for people. One is on the idea of humor and connection, is Victor Borg said the shortest distance between two people is a smile, right? So if you're unsure of how to use humor in the workplace, everyone knows how to smile. That can be a starting point. And this is one of the things that we try to work on with leaders or people kind of managing others, is that if the number one reason that people don't use humor in the workplace is because they don't think that their boss or coworkers would approve, then encourage it more. And one of the easiest ways to encourage more humor is to laugh and smile a little bit more. And it doesn't have to be the funniest joke in the world, right? You don't have any quota of laughter, right? It's not like if you laugh at a joke that's only moderately kind of okay funny in the workplace, it's not like you're going to be watching a Netflix comedy a little bit later and then be unable to physically laugh because you used it up, right? So you can just laugh a little bit more. You can smile a little bit more. And so that quote always kind of sticks with me as a way to build connections with people. And then in terms of tips, and maybe it's uncouth to kind of quote yourself, but one of the things that I think has resonated with a lot of people, at least hearing about it after the book and everything, is to think 1 smile per hour. Right? As a way to, as you're starting to incorporate humor, just think 1 smile per hour. Think, what is one thing that you do each hour of the day that brings either a smile to your face or the face of someone else? And that's how you can start to develop this humor habit. If you're going into a meeting that's an hour long, think, okay, what's the one thing that I can do in this meeting? Maybe it's starting with the story. Maybe it's using a couple of images. Maybe it's asking an interesting question of the people in the meeting. If you're about to take a long commute home, okay, what's one thing during this commute? Oh, let me put on, I just recently saw Hamilton and it was amazing. So it's like, okay, if I'm driving home, let me put on Hamilton and rock out to the music of Hamilton as a way to, again, relieve some stress or enjoy the commute a little bit more. Just like take that ownership piece and find, okay, like how do you actually incorporate it? And that leads me kind of to the last quote, and this came originally from a woman who I worked with at P&G, who ultimately kind of had this revelation that you are responsible for your own happiness, right? It's not up to your boss. It's not up to your coworkers. It's not up to your customers or your clients or patients or whatever to make sure that you enjoy what you do. Now, hopefully they don't detract from that. Hopefully they don't take away, but it's not their responsibility, right? It's up to you to make sure that you're enjoying what it is that you do. And if you're doing things that, if you have a project that you don't like or a task you have to do that you don't enjoy, or you're working in a job that you don't love, you're responsible for it. And that's not to say, oh, quit your job and, move to a beach somewhere and, hang out there all day, but instead maybe change your perspective, maybe be proactive about finding ways to have a little bit more fun.
Well, without a doubt, as you're talking, I'm starting to think about, how you've come to this path. And I mean, gosh, you're talking about being the engineer, talking about being a P&G, which, you're talking about the, legacy of an organization like that. And you don't think a whole lot about humor for them. But I mean, all this transition to where you are today, I have to think that you had a lot of humps that you've had to get over. Is there a time where you've gotten over the hump that you can share with us?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of ups and downs, and a lot more ups than downs. But there's always, certainly challenge. When I first left P&G, it was a bit intimidating, right? Because big change of going from getting a monthly salary and knowing that money was coming in to suddenly it's now a business that I run myself, and it's like, is it going to work? And there were moments where it's like, oh, I don't know. Like I would go to networking events for the food. Right. Because I was like, oh, I know this networking event is going to have some food. And, as I'm starting this business out, I need to save money and all that. And you have those moments of doubt and uncertainty. But for me, that's where, again, humor, I think the reason why I'm passionate about this is because I very much live in it. I practice it, and humor has always been a way to kind of get from. And that's one advantage of being a speaker / storyteller / comedian is in the back of my head, whenever something kind of like terrible is happening or things aren't great, I'm like, this is at least going to make for a story later. I'm going to at least be able to like turn this into some content or something, right? And having that type of perspective, being able to like back to that self-enhancing humor, finding any way to kind of look at a situation a little bit differently can definitely be helpful.
Most definitely. And the Fast Leader Legion wishes you the very best.
Now, before we move on, let's get a quick word from our sponsor. An Even Better Place to Work is an easy-to-use solution that gives you a continuous diagnostic on employee engagement along with integrated activities that will improve employee engagement and leadership skills in everyone. Using this award-winning solution is guaranteed to create motivated, productive, and loyal employees who have great work relationships with their colleagues and your customers. To learn more about An Even Better Place to Work, visit beyondmorale.com/better.
All right, here we go, Fast Leader Legion. It's time for the
Hump Day Hoedown.
Okay, Andrew, the Hoedown is the part of our show where you give us good insights fast. I'm going to ask you several questions, but your job is to give us fast and robust responses.
Okay.
Tarvin, are you ready to help us get over the hump?
I'm ready to help get over the hump.
All right. So what is holding you back from being a better leader today?
What is, I would say delegation. I've helped so much stuff. I hold so much stuff close to me. So I'm trying to get better at how do I delegate and leverage other people's strengths and abilities to scale myself and the work that we're doing.
What is the best leadership advice you have ever received?
Probably a quote from my manager my first week on the job at Proctor Gamble, which is that it is better to beg for forgiveness than it is to ask for permission. And it's, a cliche piece of advice, but it gave me complete ownership of my job at the very beginning. It's what led me to incorporating humor in my work at P&G, what led me to proclaiming myself the corporate humorist of P&G at one point and blogging about it, and ultimately led me to starting Humor That Works.
And what is one of your secrets that you believe contributes to your success?
Secrets to contribute. I think it's a love for data. I love tracking things. And one of the, I'm a big believer that reflection on the past leads to action in the future. And so it's less about the fact that I collect data, but that I look at it and then say, okay, what am I learning from this? And what, if a situation like this comes up in the future, how would I react differently? And it's basically a constant iteration. And I think that combined with the idea that I want to be better today than I was yesterday leading to a lifelong learning, a focus of lifelong learning and always constantly improving. And I think, that's the goal. Is I want to be able to look back a year from now and be like, yeah, I'm much better than I was then.
And what do you feel is one of your best tools that helps you lead in business or life?
Can I say humor? It's almost cliche to say humor because of the whole strategy. So I think humor is one, and tool. If we go straight practical, Evernote, a tool to be able to capture all of your thoughts and put those journal type entries, to put those thoughts that you have all in one place. Actually, that's one of the key tools that humorists have is a humor notebook. They have one place that they always go and put humor ideas. And for me, I use Evernote.
And what would be one book that you'd recommend to our Legion? It could be from any genre. Of course, we're going to put a link to Humor That Works on your show notes page as well.
Yeah, so certainly my book. I think you've already had him on the show. Raise Your Game by Alan Stein is a current favorite. But to go a little bit maybe out there different is I would say The Watchmen, the graphic novel from many years ago. There's so many life lessons in that, and it's a graphic novel. And it's fiction and it's meant for entertainment, but there's a lot of value, I think, in it. It's a very compelling book.
Okay, Fast Leader Legion, you can find links to that and other bonus information from today's show by going to fastleader.net/Andrew Tarvin. And that's Tarvin. Okay, but he goes by Drew.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Drew, this is my last Hump Day Hold On question. Imagine you've been given the opportunity to take the knowledge and skills that you have now back with you to the age of 25. But you can't take it all.
Mm-hmm.
So what one skill or piece of knowledge would you take back with you and why?
What would I take back? That's a fantastic question. I would take back my current ability as a speaker, right? Because over the past 10 years, right? Because for me, that would be 10 years ago. I've gotten a lot better as a speaker and better able to articulate my ideas and influence people in a way and leave them with, as a speaker, as a idea haver. The goal is to create change. And so I've gotten much better in my ability to influence and create that kind of moment and environment for people to have those aha moments and do something differently. So I would take that back and just kind of build on that success.
Drew, thanks for being on the show. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. I had a great time. If people are interested just on kind of learning how to use humor, then they can go to humorthatworks.com, and we have plenty of free resources there in terms of blog posts and free newsletter and link to the book and online course and information about, workshops and stuff. But if you're more interested just in connecting with me, whether you have questions or just, if you love puns, I love tweeting out puns. So you can follow me on social media at Drew Tarvin. So that's DREWTAR. V as in Victor IN, and that's on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I think I recently discovered I still have a MySpace page. So if that's your jam, you can connect with me there, but always more than happy to chat with people about humor.
Drew Tarvin, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. The Fast Leader Legion honors you and thanks you for helping us get over the hump.
Thank you for joining me on the Fast Leader Show today. For recaps, links from every show, special offers, and access to download and subscribe, if you haven't already, head on over to fastleader.net so we can help you move onward and upward faster.